The day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Well, today I want to jump on the Sharp Interactive board. I want to do a Ray's recap of Keypoint Intelligence 2023 predictions. They put a webinar. It was out there a couple of days ago, and the event was sponsored or put on by the folks at the MPSA Association. You know, I'm not a big fan of the MPSA Association, so thankfully they only took up about maybe 3 or 4 minutes at the very beginning, and then they were done. But folks, the bottom line is, as I was looking at the Keypoint Intelligence 2023 predictions, they put together some slides. They were sharing some information. But I think there's more to the story. And I want to take the information that they were sharing on this webinar, and I want to add the more of the story, the way I see it. Because, folks, I've been saying this for a while now, but most of the analysts in the marketplace, the bottom line is they're trying to appease an unrealistic optimism of an industry in decline. And as long as they continue with a focus of appeasement, of unrealistic optimism in a declining market, we're never going to get the information we need to navigate through these turbulent times. And so as I see these things come up from our analysts in the marketplace, I'm going to go ahead and bring them up, and I'll give my counterpoint. And the reason I'm doing this is because the folks over at Keypoint Intelligence, I mean, realistically, if they weren't worried about appeasing people and they were really focused on helping people improve, then they would probably be sharing the same things that I'm going to talk about. You would just believe that. Because I'm not going to make things up. I'm going to talk about things the way that I see them, based on the realities all around us. And then you, the listener, well, you can decide who's closer to reality. So without any further ado, let's jump on the Sharp Interactive board and kind of go through this. Let's give our kudos to the MPSA for putting this thing on. That's enough of that. But folks, the first thing they talked about was the decline in A3. That's like the person that's going to predict, stands out in the morning before the sun comes up and says the sun's going to come up. So we already know that A3 is going to decline. And folks, it's going to decline rapidly. But here's something everybody in our industry needs to pay attention to. Because Keypoint Intelligence with this analysis is spot on. We're going to decline in A3. And the ramifications of that decline are brutal to our industry. Because the entire industry, all those friends of mine that sell supply and service print equipment, are in business because of the overspec and overselling of A3 and the premature upgrading of those leases. That's our industry. I know that sounds a little bit tough. I know that sounds extremely product-centric, but it's the reality of the industry. Everybody knows this. The bigger dealers, the more sophisticated dealers, some of the smaller dealers that decided they were going to diversify and really focused on IT services and some other products and services are trying to overcome the loss of that A3 decline. So they are right about the A3 decline. They are right about the decline in the print volumes. I don't think that's rocket science. The sun's going to come up. But folks, I want to talk about the A3 thing because, you know, Keypoint Intelligence has been around for a while. And back in 2016, when Apex, now called 9-Star, and PAG, Asian Capital, picked up Lexmark, listen to what they said in the opening headline of their press release. If we are correct, Apex, with the help of PAG, has acquired Lexmark to broaden its business into print devices. The problem is that the company was sold because it was not profitable. Lexmark's business is centered around A4, which is a declining market. Lexmark's business is centered around A4, which is a declining market. What did they actually mean by that? Were they thinking about A4 desktop printing? That was declining? Because obviously back in 2016, the aspirations, the unrealistic optimism of the entire industry was let's get rid of all these desktop printers, and we're still trying to move people to the big machine in the hallway. We're still trying to overspec and oversell them in A3. But the reality of it was the customers didn't need those big A3s back in 2016 either. I think it was late 2017, early 2018 that I started the A4 revolution. So you can see they were a little bit off on that one, to say the least. But folks, you know, they did a survey. I love when these analysts put together these surveys and they go and they ask dealers and, you know, the community abroad what's going to happen in the marketplace. And I think it's just probably the way you ask the questions is the answers you get. Because again, I believe a lot of this stuff is built to appease an unrealistic optimism in an industry in a massive decline. The general desire to save costs, 74%. The desire to downsize fleets, 56%. Change fleets, lower margin, A4, 39%. You know, folks, there's a lot of this conversation around A4 being lower margin has always kind of, I don't know, I just have a problem with that a little bit. Because here's the reality. Do customers really buy a machine Or are the customers buying the desired outcome the machine gives them? All those dealer friends of mine that sell based on customer centricities, understands how to sell services, understands what I'm talking about, right? The customers are buying outcomes. Those devices are just the means to achieve the desired outcome. Whether it's an A3 or A4 is probably irrelevant to the end user, unless they have a specific need for an A3 device, and we all know that specific need, right? For the most part, is 11 by 17 capabilities, booklet finishing, stuff that a lot of people aren't even doing anymore, right? We all get it. And so if you could put an A4 device in the account, why does it have to be a lower margin? Why? Why can't we come up with a concept to sell A4 that makes sense to those end users with a service-based, customer-centric mentality? But that's not how we're thinking. This proves it. We're thinking about our industry as a product-centric industry. How much gross profit can I make? I'll be honest with you, folks. If you could sell an A4 at double its cost, that would be pretty good gross profit. The question is, what can you bundle? What can you do to that end user to get them to do that? How does that make sense in your marketplace? Those are the things we got to start figuring out. And I wish these analysts would help you all figure that kind of stuff out. What do customers most want to change? Downsize total number of devices, 48%. So we already know it, folks. Okay, we're moving from A3 to A4. Everybody knows it. Everybody's talking about it. But we're not planning how to do it effectively. That's the problem with the industry. They talked about a series of unfortunate events. I'm not going to go through that. We had a global pandemic, supply chain issues suck, the chip shortage, all the things that went with all of that, right? But at the end of the day, folks, there is opportunities. And we all know what these opportunities are, right? We got to move into broader services. We can't be selling IT services to the low-end customers. We have to move upstream, look for compliance customers, and really broaden that deliverable and go way upscale to make it make sense, fee-based assessments, all of that stuff. And there's one opportunity they discuss here that I want to just bring up, scream about. The very last one. Opportunities, MITS in a box. Offerings from leading providers, lower barriers to entry for new managed service providers. Are you out of your minds? Quit telling our dealer friends that there's going to be something called IT services in a box. Okay? Maybe that's why the industry has failed so miserably delivered. Because we got analysts out there that don't know anything about IT services, obviously, talking about how we're going to sell IT services in a box because you could partner with someone and just build this phenomenal business and move on down the road. The most successful IT service providers in this country, okay? And I'm sure the same thing applies in Europe. Don't outsource. That's just a fact. Look at our own industry here in the United States and look at the dealers that are really kicking butt in IT services. They're not doing it through some, master service provider platform that's been failing trying to help our industry for the last decade plus. They built their own infrastructures. They're going into the marketplace with disciplines, with intellect, with business plans. They're not delivering IT services in a box. This is so absurd. It just drives me crazy when these people talk about that stuff. I hope I got that point across. We talked about the hybrid worker, and I had my own opinion of this. Stop saying it. There's no such thing. It's a remote worker. Folks, this whole insanity gets to me. It just drives me crazy when I think about it. Back in 2016, I think it was 2016, I wrote an article, let's not let Amazon have all the fun, and I was talking about the remote worker and how they were going to set up their home office back in 2016 and how industries were going to put more and more people at home. When you looked at data back in 2015 and 2016, you could see the migration to the home office was already happening. I even did an episode, I think it was in 2018, and I suggested to all of my dealer friends, go to your major national accounts and ask those C-level executives what their plans are to allow their workers to work remote. Because that's where we're going. The global pandemic just sped it all up. But the businesses out there that we service as an industry, guess what? They've been building processes to allow remote work for a long time, folks. This hasn't happened since the global pandemic. That just sped it up. But our industry ignored it back then. We ignored the realities that we need to be moving into e-commerce platforms. We ignored the realities of the modern day buyer and how that modern day buyer was working in organizations that changed processes that were going to change our game and disrupt us in ways that we couldn't even have imagined. And they're talking about robotic processes. They're talking about document management, all these things. But at the end of the day, folks, here's the reality. The analysts need to do a better job because there's so many of these folks out there, right? Why don't we start digging into these other things and really articulating to the marketplace what these other things mean to the dealers? How these other things are going to replace the declining revenue of A3, the declining revenue loss from the services. We need to start talking about this. The OEMs, the dealers, everybody. We need to understand as an industry how we're going to replace this declining revenue. And as long as we continue to partake in these events that are put on by organizations that are trying to appease an unrealistic optimism in a declining industry, we're not going to improve. We're not going to change the game. Remember, it's not about a hybrid worker. It's about a remote worker and a business changing their processes to do what? Eliminate print and scan. They talk about the IT services opportunity. Not only is it delivered in a box, folks, we need to really understand this. I'm going to do my best to continue to share the success stories around IT services as I interview folks that really understand this game and they're willing to share their numbers and the way they're doing this, and will help you understand the processes. But at the end of the day, I shouldn't be the only one in the marketplace. These OEMs out there have a responsibility to the industry to share what's going on with these other deliverables besides the A3 print. I've been beating on them about it for a long, long time, and it's about time our analysts joined in that fight to help our industry navigate through these tough times, because it's getting to a point of absurdity. And folks, here's the bottom line. I don't care about artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotic process automation. None of that stuff matters at all if the industry doesn't understand how they're going to monetize it, profit from it, to replace the declines in A3 print. One of the things they talked about, and this slide is just, it was almost comical, and I know the good intentions of Keypoint Intelligence were to do what, in my opinion, appease an over-optimistic industry. But they're talking about some of the things that are going to happen, how these OEMs are going to be, so concerned about sustainability in the world. We already know that. Permissions to show up. It's not a prediction. But they said something in here about OEMs remanufacturing machines. I'll get to that in a second. But they talked about how the industry OEMs need to consolidate it back in 2012, and they listed all these names, and I was kind of a little bit confused because in 2012, Konica and Minolta were already one company. Maybe they should have put Minolta next to Konica. In 2001, Ricoh had already bought Lanier. In 1995, Ricoh had bought Savin. So in 2012, a lot of this was already happening. And over here in 2022 and who they're going to be. But why don't we talk about this in more realistic terms? Why don't we talk about the OEMs that are struggling financially? Why can't we talk about this? We're not allowed to? Probably not, because we're trying to appease an over-optimistic industry on decline, right? There's no teeth in it. There's no teeth in the predictions of how it's going to happen. Why is nobody talking about the consolidation of manufacturing? Does nobody in the world, all of the analysts that we deal with in our industry, none of these people believe that the OEMs are going to consolidate their manufacturing when it's happening all around us? It's already happening, but we're not talking about it. Okay? We're not going to see OEMs buying each other up. It's not going to happen. And if you believe it's going to happen, then you should predict how that's going to happen. So to open up those conversations. It would be nice to open up some conversations, because it's through conversations and dialogue that things actually, come clear, right? Anyway, I just thought that was kind of nutty. But folks, here's something they said. They did a survey, and it says close to 30% of resellers, machines in fields are second use. I agree with that. A lot of dealers, that's all they do sell is used equipment. But that's not remanufactured equipment. They're talking about how OEMs are going to remanufacture the equipment. This is absurd. I want to see more teeth and science in that, because that just seems to me to be nutty. You might have some folks over in Asia, China specifically, that might grab some equipment, refurbish it, and put in the third world, okay? But the folks here in the United States, and I'm sure it's the same in Europe, they're not going to remanufacture the equipment. They're just going to resell it like they've been doing for the last 3 decades. Why would they waste the time and the money to remanufacture it? These things have all been on service contracts. They're all taken care of for the most part. They can buy them from a wholesaler. They can use their own population and put it back out in the market. We've been doing that as an industry forever. But to think that OEMs are going to start remanufacturing hardware is a little bit crazy to me, without putting some real text to that. Who's going to do this and why? Like I said, there might be some folks over in Asia that might do this, but where's that product going to go? And that's not going to, that's just a crazy thought and concept. Xerox used to remanufacture their big iron, but they don't even do that, folks. We're not going to remanufacture equipment. Dealers will continue to sell the used equipment they get in. But here's the reality. As the equipment moves more to A4, no one's remanufacturing anything. You're going to throw it in the trash can. And by the way, sustainability to remanufacture machines, I think it's better for the environment for them just to make a new one. What are you going to do? Ship all these back to some factory, rip them all to pieces, make a new one out of it, shred all those pieces to make park benches? I think it's crazy talk. Just my opinion. So, folks, that was my kind of overview of the Keypoint Intelligence predictions. I wish they would have put more predictions in there and talked about what they really thought so that they could get conversations brewing. Because I know the folks over at Keypoint Intelligence have some intelligence. I think they all know where this industry is going. The problem is, if our analysts can't talk about it in real terms, well, might have a lot of people get stuck in status quo. And everybody watching me knows this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.